The ultimatum was clear: submit or perish. The Galactic Empire's envoy, a tall, silver-skinned alien with elongated limbs and a voice like grinding stone, stood on the dais before Earth's united planetary coalition. Earth's continued resistance is futile. You will surrender all military assets to the Empire, cease technological expansion, and pledge loyalty to Emperor Zalvan. Non-compliance will result in your planet's eradication. The room was silent except for the low hum of the holographic transmission, broadcasting across the galaxy. The gathered delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces pale. Earth's representative, Ambassador Calvert, stood slowly, his movements deliberate. "We will deliberate," he said, his tone betraying none of the storm brewing behind his stern eyes. The transmission cut, and the delegates erupted into argument. "Submit? Are you mad?" one barked, slamming his fist on the table. "Our fleets are vastly outnumbered," another retorted. "The Empire has over 1,000 worlds under its thumb." Ambassador Calvert raised a hand, silencing the cacophony. "Our decision must be strategic, not reactionary. But understand this: negotiation is a stall tactic. We can't afford to rely on diplomacy alone. If we submit, humanity's independence ends. We'll be slaves." A secure channel buzzed in Calvert's earpiece. He tapped it, leaning back as a calm, gravelly voice spoke. "This is Kane. Rangers are in position." Captain Logan Kane scanned the horizon through infrared binoculars. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of red dunes broken only by jagged black cliffs. Ahead lay the Empire's mining operation, a sprawling complex of metallic spires glinting under Cryosus III's twin suns. The air shimmered with heat, and the distant hum of heavy machinery carried across the wind. "Specs status report," Kane said, lowering the binoculars. Sergeant Elena, Specs, Vargas was crouched beside a portable terminal, her fingers flying across its holographic keyboard. "Empire's communication relays are tight. Took some effort, but I've got their guard rotations and internal schematics. Also confirmed the presence of their gravitonic annihilator." Kane clenched his jaw. He had read the reports. The weapon wasn't just a deterrent, it was a declaration of absolute control. 3 days to activation? 2.5. Specs corrected, not looking up. Kane turned to the rest of his squad, crouched in the shade of a rocky overhang. Each one bore the scars of countless battles, their armor battered but functional. "All right, team. This is what we trained for. Our mission is twofold: disable the gravitonic annihilator and cripple their mining operation. We've got alien allies in the area, resistance fighters. They're scrappy but green. We'll guide them, hit key targets, and get the job done." Private Harris, the youngest of the group, shifted nervously. "And if we get caught?" Kane's sharp gaze pinned him. "We don't get caught." Night fell quickly on Cryosus III, the desert's oppressive heat giving way to an icy chill. The team moved under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the sand. Specs led the way, her portable terminal projecting a faint blue glow as she navigated their route. Kane followed closely, his weapons slung across his back. They reached the first target, a supply depot on the mining complex's outskirts. Imperial sentries patrolled the area, their sleek, black armor reflecting the starlight. Kane motioned for silence, signaling Harris and Corporal Dax to flank left while he and Specs circled right. Harris's breathing was audible over the comms, shaky but controlled. "Relax," Dax whispered, her tone low and reassuring. "Stick to the plan." Kane moved with practiced precision, slipping between shadows. A sentry passed within inches, oblivious to the predator stalking nearby. Kane struck swiftly, his blade finding the gap in the sentry's armor. The alien crumpled soundlessly to the ground. "Clear," Kane whispered. Specs hacked into the depot's security panel, her hands steady despite the countdown ticking in her head. The locks disengaged with a faint hiss, and the Rangers slipped inside. Crates stacked high with zephyrite gleamed under harsh artificial light. "This is it," Specs said, attaching a timed explosive to the nearest pile. 10 minutes to fireworks." The blast echoed across the desert like thunder, the depot erupting into a fiery inferno. Alarms blared from the main complex as Imperial forces scrambled to respond. Kane and his team retreated to a rendezvous point, where the alien resistance fighters waited. Vexrin, their leader, was a towering figure with ash-gray skin and bioluminescent patterns across his face. He eyed the Rangers with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Impressive. But one explosion won't win this war. It's a start, Kane replied. You want to free your people? Follow our lead. Vexrin crossed his arms. And what does humanity gain from this alliance? Kane stepped closer, his voice cold. The Empire's not just your problem. If they take Cryosis 3, Earth is next. We're in this together, whether you trust us or not. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant roar of Imperial ships converging on the depot. Then Vexrin nodded. Very well. What's the next move? Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. We cut the head off the snake. The next phase of the mission was far riskier, infiltrating the Gravitonic Annihilator facility itself. Specs briefed the team and their new allies as they huddled in a hidden cave. The weapon's powered by a Zephyrite core deep in the facility. We need to disable it before it goes online. And the guards? Vexrin asked. Plenty, Specs replied. But their rotations are predictable. We'll create diversions to split their forces. Kane's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. This isn't just about hitting the Empire where it hurts. It's about showing them they're not invincible. They think humanity's small, insignificant. We're going to prove them wrong. As dawn broke, the Rangers and Resistance fighters moved toward the facility. They were vastly outnumbered, but their plan relied on speed and precision. Kane led the charge, his rifle barking with deadly efficiency. Vexrin's warriors followed suit, their makeshift weapons tearing through Imperial lines. Inside the facility, Specs raced against the clock, hacking into the core's controls. The Gravitonic Annihilator loomed above them, a menacing construct of alien design. Almost there, she muttered, sweat dripping down her face. Kane held the line, his squad covering Specs as Imperial reinforcements poured in. He barked orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. Harris, left flank! Dax on me! Finally, the core's hum faltered, and the lights dimmed. Got it! Specs shouted. Kane didn't hesitate. Fall back! Now! The team escaped moments before the core went critical. A deafening explosion ripped through the facility, a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke rising into the sky. Cheers erupted from the Resistance fighters as they watched the Empire's prized weapon reduced to rubble. Kane surveyed the scene, his expression grim but resolute. This is just the beginning, he said quietly. The Empire won't stop. Neither will we. Vexrin approached, his glowing patterns flickering with determination. Today, we proved they can bleed. Tomorrow, we'll make them fall. Kane nodded. Tomorrow. The night was unnervingly quiet after the explosion. Captain Kane crouched behind a jagged outcropping of stone, scanning the distant Imperial facility with his binoculars. The blast from the supply depot had bought them time, but the Empire's response was swift. He could see their sleek, insect-like patrol drones scouring the area. He clicked his comms. Specs, tell me you've got eyes on those patrols. I do, but I don't like it, Vargas replied. Her voice was steady despite the tension. They're triangulating. If we stay here much longer, they'll find us. We won't stay. Harris, how's that diversion coming along? Kane's voice carried the kind of calm authority that turned fear into focus. Almost there, Harris whispered from his position, concealed in a nearby cave. He was rigging a decoy device designed to emit false heat signatures and scrambled comm signals. Just another second. A loud whoosh pierced the stillness as one of the drones passed overhead, its spotlight sweeping dangerously close to their position. Harris froze, his fingers hovering over the device. Kane clenched his jaw. Stay steady. Don't move until it's past. The beam crept closer. Kane's heart raced, but his breathing remained even. Just as the light skimmed over the edge of their cover, the drone veered away, following a faint noise in the opposite direction. Harris exhaled sharply. Diversion set. Let's move. Kane gestured sharply to his team, signaling their retreat toward the resistance base. They moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the sand. The resistance fighters followed, though their inexperience was clear in the awkward way they clutched their weapons. Vexrin, their leader, kept pace beside Kane, his glowing patterns dimmed to avoid detection. This distraction won't hold them for long, he said. It doesn't need to, Kane replied, his tone clipped. We've already done the damage. Now we regroup, plan the next hit, and make sure the Empire regrets stepping foot on this planet. You speak with such confidence, Vexrin said, his voice laced with skepticism. But your people are few. How do you intend to defeat an empire that spans galaxies? Kane didn't break stride. By fighting smarter. The Empire relies on brute force and fear. That's their weakness. They expect submission, not resistance. Vexrin let out a low growl. You make it sound simple. It's not, Kane admitted. But we don't have the luxury of doubting ourselves. Doubt gets people killed. By the time they reached the resistance hideout, hidden deep within a labyrinth of canyons, the adrenaline was wearing off. The fighters collapsed onto makeshift seats, their exhaustion evident. Vargas set up her terminal, already sifting through the data she had intercepted. Harris unpacked their remaining supplies, his hands still trembling from the tension of the night. Kane stood in the center of the room, addressing the group. We hit them hard tonight, but it's not over. Specs, what's the status of the gravitonic annihilator? Vargas didn't look up from her screen. Still on schedule. 2 days until activation. The core is housed deep in their main facility, heavily guarded. If we want to disable it, we'll need more than just explosives. We'll need access codes. Access codes? Dax raised an eyebrow. How the hell are we supposed to get those? Vargas smirked faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Lucky for us, I intercepted a comms relay. There's an Imperial officer on site with clearance. Lieutenant Malvek. If we can get to him, we can get what we need. Kane turned to Vexrin. Do you know this officer? Vexrin nodded grimly. He oversees the enslaved miners. A cruel being, even by Imperial standards. Then he'll have a target on his back, Kane said. We'll take him alive, get the codes, and shut that weapon down. Harris looked uneasy. And if he doesn't talk? Kane's expression hardened. He'll talk. The following day, they prepared for the mission. Vexrin briefed his fighters, though their morale was tenuous. Many of them had lost family to the Empire's brutality, and the idea of sparing any Imperial officer, even temporarily, didn't sit well with them. Kane understood their anger, but he knew they couldn't afford vengeance to cloud their judgment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the team moved out. The facility loomed ahead, its spires silhouetted against the fading light. Patrols were thicker than before, and the air buzzed with the hum of Imperial ships circling overhead. Kane led the way, every movement deliberate. They reached the perimeter, where Vexrin's fighters created a diversion. Explosions erupted on the far side of the facility, drawing guards away. Kane's team slipped inside through a maintenance tunnel, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with Vargas's guidance. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the walls, a grim reminder of the stakes. They found Malvek in a command room, barking orders into a communicator. The officer was tall and insected, with chitinous armor and cold, multifaceted eyes. He barely had time to react before Dax disarmed him with a swift strike, pinning him against the wall. You've got one chance, Kane said, his voice low and menacing. Give us the codes. Malvek clicked his mandibles defiantly. You think I fear you, human? You're nothing but insects beneath the Empire's boot. Kane stepped closer, his gaze icy. We'll see about that. Vargas hacked into the facility's systems, displaying the gravitonic annihilator's schematics on a nearby screen. You see this? She said, pointing to the weapon's core. We're going to shut it down, with or without your help. But if you don't cooperate, we'll make sure you go down with it. Malvik hesitated, his arrogance faltering. You're bluffing. Kane leaned in, his voice a deadly whisper. Do I look like I'm bluffing? The silence stretched, heavy with tension. Finally, Malvik relented, hissing the access codes through gritted mandibles. Vargas quickly verified them, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Got it, she said. We're in. Kane didn't waste a second. Move out. Now. They exited the facility under heavy fire, the alarms blaring in a deafening cacophony. Vexrin's fighters provided cover, their determination renewed by the sight of Malvik captured. As the team regrouped at their extraction point, Kane took a moment to survey the battlefield. The resistance was holding its ground, but the Empire would retaliate soon. Vargas approached him, her expression grim. The codes will get us into the core, but disabling it won't be easy. They've got redundancies in place. We'll need to go in ourselves. Kane nodded, his jaw set. Then we'll do it. No matter the cost. Vexrin joined them, his glowing patterns pulsing with intensity. Tonight we struck a blow. Tomorrow we finish it. Kane met his gaze, a rare flicker of a smile breaking through his stoicism. Damn right we do. As the stars stretched endlessly above them, the team prepared for the final battle, knowing the fate of Crisis 3, and possibly humanity itself, rested on their shoulders. The team's breathing was steady as they crept through the tunnels leading to the core of the gravitonic annihilator. Kane took point, his rifle sweeping left and right, every step a practiced motion of discipline. Vargas followed close behind, the glow of her handheld device casting faint blue light against the metallic walls. Dax and Harris brought up the rear, silent but tense, their eyes darting between the shifting shadows. Vexrin and two resistance fighters trailed behind, the alien leader gripping his weapon with grim determination. They'll know we're coming, Vargas murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. They always do, Kane replied, his tone calm but focused. That's why we don't give them time to react. As they neared the control room, the air grew hotter, humming with the faint vibrations of energy emanating from the core. Vargas stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Wait! Motion sensors ahead. Kane crouched beside her, peering at the device in her hands. Can you disable them? Not without triggering an alert, she said, biting her lip. But I can loop their feed. Give me 60 seconds. Make it 30, Kane said, his eyes fixed on the corridor ahead. We don't have the luxury of time. Vargas nodded, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Behind them, Harris shifted nervously, his knuckles white around his weapon. How can you be so calm about this? He whispered to Dax. Dax didn't look at him. Because panic gets you killed. Stay focused. The seconds ticked by like hours, the silence pressing in around them. Finally, Vargas exhaled sharply. Done. They'll think we're ghosts. Good work, Kane said, moving forward. Let's go. They entered the control room without incident, the expansive space dominated by consoles and a massive viewport overlooking the core. The gravitonic annihilator pulsed with a sickly green light, its energy tendrils snaking toward the ceiling like living wires. Vargas immediately set to work at the nearest console, her eyes scanning the streams of alien code. This thing is a nightmare, she muttered. Redundant locks on top of redundant locks. They really don't want anyone messing with it. Can you shut it down? Kane asked, standing guard by the door. I can, Vargas said, her brow furrowed in concentration. But I'll need time. And once I start, they'll know we're here. They already know, Vexrin said, his voice low. He gestured toward the viewport, where figures in Imperial armor were beginning to converge on their location. They're coming. Then we hold them off, Kane said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Harris, Dax, cover the east entrance. Vexrin, take your people to the west. Buy Vargas the time she needs. The team snapped into action, positioning themselves at choke points around the room. The first wave of Imperials arrived moments later, their boots pounding against the metal floor. Harris fired the opening shot, his rifle crackling with blue plasma as it struck the lead soldier. Chaos erupted as more Imperials poured in, their return fire lighting up the room in bursts of energy. Dax's voice came through the comms, calm and measured. "They're bringing reinforcements. We won't be able to hold them forever." "We don't need forever," Kane replied. "Just long enough." Vargas worked feverishly, her fingers flying over the console. The alien code resisted her efforts at every turn, layers of encryption unraveling only to reveal new barriers. "This thing's like a hydra," she muttered. "Cut off one head, 2 more grow back." "Keep cutting," Kane said, firing a burst at an Imperial who had gotten too close. He felt the heat of return fire singe the air near his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. On the west side, Vexrin and his fighters were holding their ground, their makeshift weapons surprisingly effective against the Imperials. One of his men fell, a bolt of plasma striking him square in the chest. Vexrin snarled, firing back with renewed fury. "Kane, we can't sustain this. If you have a plan, now is the time." "We're working on it," Kane said, glancing over at Vargas. "How much longer?" "Almost there," she said through gritted teeth. "Just a few more seconds." "Make it happen," Kane said, turning back to the fight. The Imperials were advancing, their superior armor and coordination pushing the defenders back inch by inch. Harris took a hit to the leg, dropping to one knee with a grunt of pain. Dax pulled him behind cover, returning fire with precision that kept the enemy at bay. "Got it!" Vargas suddenly shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "The core's destabilizing. This place is going to blow." "Time to go," Kane said, firing one last shot before pulling back. He grabbed Harris by the arm, helping him limp toward the exit. "Everyone, fall back!" The team retreated down the corridor, the sound of alarms blaring behind them. The core's hum had grown into a deafening roar, the energy tendrils now lashing wildly against the walls. Vexrin stayed at the rear, covering their escape with bursts of fire. The Imperials were in disarray, their forces scattered as the facility began to collapse around them. They reached the extraction point, where a stolen Imperial transport waited. Vargas dove into the pilot's seat, firing up the engines as the others scrambled aboard. Kane helped Harris into a seat, strapping him in before taking position by the hatch. "Everyone accounted for?" "Vexrin's team is all here," the alien leader said, his chest heaving from exertion. "Barely." "Then let's get out of here," Kane said. The transport lifted off just as the facility detonated. The explosion lit up the desert night, a blinding flash followed by a massive shockwave that rattled the ship. Kane watched through the viewport as the gravitonic annihilator was consumed by fire, its remains collapsing into a smoldering crater. Cheers erupted from the resistance fighters, their relief palpable. Vexrin turned to Kane, his glowing patterns flickering with a faint sense of awe. "You did it! The Empire will feel this blow." "It's not over," Kane said, his expression grim. "They'll be back. And they'll hit harder. Then we'll be ready," Vexrin said. For the first time, there was no skepticism in his voice, only resolve. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but tonight, they had won a victory. And for now, that was enough. The ship's engines hummed steadily as the stolen Imperial transport streaked through the upper atmosphere of Cryosus 3. Inside, silence hung heavily over the team. The glowing embers of the gravitonic annihilator's destruction still flickered faintly in the distance, visible through the viewport. Harris winced as Dax tightened a makeshift bandage around his leg, and Vargas leaned against the cockpit console, catching her breath. "We've bought time," Kane said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of the battle. "Not much, but enough to make the next move." "The next move?" Harris asked, his voice tight with exhaustion. "Captain, I don't know how much more we've got in us." "That was too close." Vexrin stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the group. "Your comrade is right. We struck a blow, but the Empire will respond with overwhelming force. This victory could become a funeral if we're not prepared. Kane nodded, his expression grim. I know. That's why we need to go further. Vargas raised an eyebrow. Further? What are you thinking, Kane? We exposed a weakness tonight, Kane said, pacing the small cabin. The Empire doesn't expect coordinated resistance from what they see as lesser species. If we hit them where they're vulnerable, we can do more than just survive. We can turn this into a rallying cry for every planet under their boot. Dax leaned back, crossing her arms. You're talking about starting a galactic rebellion. No, Kane replied, meeting her gaze. I'm talking about giving people a reason to believe it's possible. Vexrin studied Kane, his bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly as he considered the words. You speak of inspiring others, yet your own team is at its limit. Will you ask them to keep fighting until there's nothing left? Kane's eyes softened. I won't ask anything of anyone who's not willing. But I know what's at stake, and I know what happens if we stop now. The Empire wins. Not just here, everywhere. Vargas sighed, rubbing her temples. All right, say we're in. What's the plan? And please tell me it doesn't involve another exploding facility. Kane smirked faintly. Not this time. The Empire's fleet will be arriving soon to assess the damage. We can't fight them directly, but we can use their arrival to our advantage. If we can broadcast proof of their atrocities, the forced labor camps, the experiments, they'll lose the one thing holding their empire together, fear. Dax nodded slowly. You think other systems will rise up if they see the truth? They'll have no choice, Kane said. Fear only works if people believe they're alone. Show them they're not, and the cracks start to form. Harris shifted uncomfortably. And how do we pull off this broadcast? We barely got out alive back there. That's where we get creative, Kane said, turning to Vargas. Think you can tap into one of their main communication hubs? Vargas straightened, her tired expression sharpening into determination. If you get me close enough, I can crack their encryption. But it'll be loud. They'll know the second I'm in. That's the idea, Kane said. We make it loud enough that the entire galaxy hears us. Vexrin stepped closer, his gaze steady. If you succeed, you'll paint a target on your back that no one can ignore. The Empire will stop at nothing to destroy you. Kane met his eyes. They're already hunting us. The difference is, after this, they won't just be hunting me, they'll be hunting a symbol. And symbols are harder to kill. The plan unfolded quickly. Using the stolen transport's credentials, Vargas traced the nearest Imperial relay station, located on the outskirts of a nearby mining colony. It wasn't as heavily fortified as the Annihilator facility, but the Empire wouldn't leave something so critical unguarded. They approached the station under the cover of a dust storm, the transport's cloaking systems masking their approach. Inside, the Rangers and Resistance fighters worked in quiet synchronization, their movements precise despite the weariness that clung to them. The storm battered against the station's exterior, a natural shield against prying eyes. Kane led the way, his rifle ready. Vargas followed with her equipment, scanning for access points. Dax and Harris covered their flanks, while Vexrin and his fighters secured the perimeter. Got it, Vargas whispered as she connected her terminal to the station's mainframe. Lines of alien code scrolled rapidly across the screen. Give me a minute. Kane positioned himself by the entrance, his eyes scanning the swirling dust outside. Make it 30 seconds. We don't want to be here longer than necessary. The system resisted Vargas's attempts, the encryption more complex than she anticipated. They really don't make this easy, do they? She muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. Almost there. The lights flickered, and the terminal let out a faint beep. I'm in, Vargas said, her voice triumphant. Uploading the data now. The broadcast began seconds later, a pulse of raw, unfiltered truths sent out to every Imperial frequency in the sector. Footage of labor camps, experiments, and the devastation wrought by the Empire filled screens across the galaxy. Vargas's voiceover narrated the horrors in stark detail, painting a picture of oppression and cruelty that no amount of propaganda could erase. They'll be here any second, Dax warned, her weapon trained on the doorway. We need to move. Kane nodded. Vargas, can you lock them out of their own system? Already working on it, she said, her fingers moving in a blur. They'll have to rebuild the entire network to undo this. The first wave of Imperials arrived just as the upload completed. Vexrin's fighters engaged them, their determination burning brighter than ever. Kane led his team toward the transport, firing in controlled bursts to cover their retreat. The storm raged around them as they boarded the ship, the winds howling like a living thing. Vargas collapsed into the pilot's seat, her hands flying over the controls. Hold on, she said. This is going to get bumpy. The transport lifted off, buffeted by the storm as it climbed into the atmosphere. Kane watched the relay station shrink behind them, smoke rising from the skirmish below. He felt the weight of what they had done settle on his shoulders, but there was no time to dwell on it. They'll know it was us, Dax said, her voice steady despite the tension. Good, Kane replied. Let them come. The galaxy knows now. They can't hide anymore. Vexrin stepped forward, his bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly. Your broadcast will inspire many, but it will also bring wrath upon your people. We'll handle it, Kane said. We've handled worse. The transport broke free of the atmosphere, the stars stretching out before them. Kane turned to his team, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. Tonight, we gave them something they can't take back. Hope. And hope is a weapon they'll never be ready for. Vargas grinned faintly, exhaustion etched into her features. Hope's good. But next time, let's not cut it so close. Kane smirked. Where's the fun in that? The transport disappeared into the void, leaving the burning station and the seeds of rebellion in its wake.